Hey guys, tonight we begin with the bone-snapping, snot-freezing nightmare that was surviving a Viking winter. In this story, we're diving headfirst into what it was actually like to survive the Norse winter, not as a warrior, not as a chieftain, but as a common, unlucky villager stuck at the bottom of the survival ladder. You'll discover how Vikings tried to sleep without freezing to death, what they actually ate when the food ran out, how they handled toilets in sub-zero temperatures. If you're enjoying our sleepy stories, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if you're listening from somewhere cold, maybe drop a comment letting us know you've still got all your toes. It's always fascinating to see who's drifting off with us from around the world. Now dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's icy adventure together. You're not a warrior, you're not a chief, you're not even important enough to have your own fur cloak. You're simply present, a breathing body in the Norse wilderness, a marginally functional peasant conscripted by unfortunate timing and communal desperation into the camp's winter survival crew. Your arrival is not celebrated. You're not given a horn of mead or a warm stew. You're handed a splintered wooden ladle and pointed toward the pile of frozen fish that need to be descaled using your teeth. Not literally, but close. The camp itself is less of a settlement and more of a dare, a scattering of wooden structures lashed together with hope, seal tendons and historical stubbornness. Smoke dribbles from the longhouse roof. The air smells like pine, mouldy cheese, and something that might once have been elk. Your sleeping arrangements are negotiable. You get a corner near the door that doesn't really close. Drafts pour in like drunken ghosts. Your bedding consists of a thin straw mat, a fur blanket that's seen some things, and a sheep that insists on being the little spoon. You'd protest, but honestly the sheep is warmer than you are. Food is a concept. Meals are served from a single communal cauldron that has not been cleaned since the last solstice. The stew within is legendary, part soup, part social experiment, and entirely unknowable. Each bite is a gamble between nourishment and mild hallucination. You eat it anyway. Hunger has no pride. Outside the world is frozen. The snow crunches beneath your boots with a sound that says, you are trespassing. The trees are bare, their limbs like bony fingers raised in warning. Somewhere in the distance, wolves remind you that you're not the apex predator here. You clutch your bundle of firewood tighter. You pretend the wolf howls are festive. Your tasks are endless and degrading. You're told to chop firewood, but the axe is dull and the wood is frozen harder than church pews. You're sent to fetch water, which involves smashing a hole in the ice and hoping nothing in the dark water grabs you back. You're asked to help freshen the latrine pit. You don't ask questions. You just cry a little, silently, into your mittens. There is no privacy. There is no quiet. There is only the endless shuffle of damp feet, the grumble of digestive systems attempting to process questionable protein, and the occasional argument about whether someone's lice have migrated into communal furs. You nod a lot. You try not to scratch. And then there's the cold. The ever-present, all-consuming sentient cold. It's not just outside. It's in your boots, in your bones, in your soul. It seeps into your teeth and whispers, "You're not built for this." Your nostrils freeze shut at least twice before noon. Your eyelids crunch when you blink. You begin to believe your spine has developed frostbite. The elders are no help. They're busy sacrificing eels to the gods, or burning incense made from fermented moss and last year's goat dandruff. Their solutions to the cold include cryptic riddles and biting into tree bark. You participate because you're too tired to argue and too frozen to care. Some nights the cold is so absolute you dream of warmth, not fire or blankets, but simply the absence of suffering. You fantasize about lukewarm broth, about standing in a room that doesn't leak wind, about socks that don't have personalities, but here's the thing, you endure. Not well, not heroically, but you endure. Because winter isn't an enemy here, it's a character in the saga, one that mocks you, tests you, and occasionally licks your face in the form of freezing rain. And if you make it to spring without losing your mind or your toes, You might even earn the grudging respect of your fellow frost zombies. For now, though, your fire is low. Your hands are cracked. Your bed is occupied by a goat who snores. And tomorrow promises more snow, more stew, and the deeply philosophical question, how much wool can you stuff in your pants before it becomes a fire hazard? Welcome to the Viking winter survival camp. You're already late for snow shoveling duty. And yes, someone definitely peed in the snow bath again. You wouldn't think sleep could be dangerous, but that's because you've never tried doing it in a Viking winter. Out here, sleep isn't rest. It's a nightly duel with hypothermia, rodents, spiritual dread, and the questionable flatulence of everyone within a 10-foot radius. There are no beds, there are no pillows, there is only the floor, which is either frozen solid or lightly steaming from goat activity. The only insulation is straw, which you will soon learn is nature's glitter. It sticks to everything, itches like a curse, and somehow ends up in your mouth even if you swear you didn't move. Your designated sleeping zone is against the outer wall of the longhouse, also known as the Viking death row of bedtime assignments. It's the draftiest, coldest, and most rat-accessible location in the structure. Every exhale leaves a puff of steam. Every blink risks frost forming on your eyelashes. At one point in the night, you become convinced you've gone blind, but it's just ice fog clouding your vision from your own breath. The fire, which everyone insists is good enough, sputters in the centre of the room like it's trying to retire early. It provides just enough heat to keep your immediate molecules above freezing and just enough smoke to make your lungs question their life choices. No one complains. Complaining is reserved for real emergencies, like running out of turnips or stepping on a sharp piece of dried fish. You try to get comfortable. That's hilarious. Comfort here means not having anything currently poking you and only one exposed toe. You wedge yourself into your allotted straw divot and pull your fur blanket over your head. It smells like damp beard and regret. You try not to think about who owned it before you. Beside you, someone snores, loudly. The kind of snore that could shake loose roof timbers. On your other side, a dog wheezes. Or maybe it's a person. Either way, something is licking its own foot with the confidence of a creature that's seen things and survived worse. You close your eyes. You open them again 30 seconds later because a sudden gust of wind through the wallboards has found its way down your spine like a ghost with cold hands. You curl tighter. You whisper a prayer. You consider trading your soul for a pair of socks that aren't made of hair. At some point, a chicken jumps onto your chest. No one knows why there's a chicken inside, but no one's surprised either. You try to shoo it away, but the movement dislodges your blanket and now your thigh is exposed to the cruel air. It goes numb in record time. You've just lost the leg lottery. You finally start to drift into something resembling unconsciousness. That's when the real chaos begins. First, someone kicks over a ladle left too close to the fire. It clangs against the hearthstone with the urgency of a battlefield alarm. A few people grumble, a few shift. One man starts praying in what might be Swedish or might just be snoring with ambition. Then, a toddler wakes up and begins wailing at a pitch that could summon wolves. No one moves to comfort them because the unwritten rule is that whoever breaks the peace must handle the consequences alone. It's a harsh but fair system. The toddler eventually gives up. Victory. Then, someone coughs, and that's when you realise they're about to get up. A full-body shift, a groan, a soft curse, and then the unmistakable sound of a man trying to tiptoe over 12 bodies in the dark with the grace of a drunk reindeer. He steps on your ankle, you bite your lip and accept your fate. He apologises by farting gently in your direction. Eventually you fall asleep. You think. You're not sure. Time no longer works properly in the longhouse. It's just darkness, coughing, random fire pops, and the occasional whispered rune chant from the old woman in the corner who might be asleep or casting spells. When morning comes, or at least when someone throws open the door and lets in the blinding grey of not night, you feel like you've aged a decade. Your back is locked into the shape of a bent ladle. Your feet are buzzing with pins and needles. Your face is covered in a thin sheen of hay dust. goat dandruff and shame. But you did it. You survived the night. You didn't freeze, didn't suffocate, didn't get pecked into oblivion by the rogue chicken. You're still here, cold, sore and slightly feral, but alive. And that's a win. Because in a Viking winter, sleep isn't about dreams, it's about not dying, and you've got at least 100 more nights of this to go. You never thought you'd mourn a beverage. But here you are, shivering under a suspiciously damp fur blanket, facing the most catastrophic news of the season. The mead is gone. Gone. Not low, not rationed, not someone's hiding a cask behind the elder's bedroll, just gone. Drained. Vanished. A communal silence had fallen over the longhouse this morning. Not reverent, not respectful, just stunned. The kind of silence reserved for witnessing the end of an era, or watching someone fall face first into a latrine. There had always been mead, warm, strange, slightly sour, occasionally fizzy mead, a thick golden reminder that despite the biting cold, rotting fish, and goat-induced insomnia, there was still a god somewhere who wanted you to be a little drunk by dusk. Now that God has clearly abandoned you, to understand the gravity of this disaster, you must understand what mead is in this camp. It's not a luxury, it's not a party favour, it's the social glue that keeps people from strangling each other over whose turn it is to chop ice from the communal pea pit. It's antifreeze for your soul, liquid denial, the warm blur that takes the edge off realising that your socks have frozen into your boots again and that someone has mistaken your mittens for fire kindling. Again. Without it, everything feels sharper. The cold bites harder, the hunger gnaws deeper, and the people? Oh, the people are infinitely more annoying. You start to notice things, like how the man next to you chews dried fish with the rhythm of a dying accordion, or how the woman 3 bodies down mutters aggressively to her knitting, which to be fair has more holes than yarn, or how the elder keeps licking his fingers before turning every page of the communal story scroll, which everyone will now touch during evening tales. This is how it starts. Mead withdrawal. Not in the medical sense, though your body does miss the warmth, but socially, spiritually, communally. The longhouse becomes a hive of irritability. Every minor grievance becomes a full-blown conspiracy. Someone is definitely hoarding dried berries. Someone else definitely farted during the sacred mealtime chant. Someone, probably you, looked too smug after successfully starting a fire on the first try. People remember, people plot. To fill the gap, the elders propose a replacement. Herbal infusion. This sounds promising until you realise it's just hot water with old grass in it. You drink it anyway. It tastes like disappointment. Someone suggests steeping dried birch bark with just a hint of goat hair. You nod solemnly, unsure whether to be offended or impressed by the creativity. You try to recreate the mead experience. You pretend your steaming bark tea is rich with honey and fermented joy. You raise your carved wooden mug with a theatrical grunt. You clink it gently against the nearest person's elbow and offer a toast to surviving another night without growing a second layer of frostbite. No one laughs. They just sip and glare. The cold doesn't help. Without the mellowing buzz of mead, the cold becomes philosophical. It gets into your thoughts. You begin to question your decisions. Why did you come to this camp? Why is everything made of wood and disappointment? Why are you sleeping beside a man who hums lullabies to his toenails? Desperation sets in. You hear rumours of secret brewing attempts. Someone fermenting root vegetables in a buried clay jar. Someone else trying to distill melted snow, pine sap, and whatever's in the bottom of the pickled herring bucket. These people are heroes, or madmen, or both. But the real tragedy isn't just the dryness of your throat. It's the collapse of the rituals. Mead was a constant, a nightly act of unity. Raising the mugs, slapping backs, exchanging grunts that counted as conversation. Without it, the evenings stretch on in awkward silence. The fire crackles, someone coughs. A chicken makes prolonged eye contact, and still no one toasts. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, which is mostly rafters and the underside of an actual raccoon, that may or may not be nesting there. You listen to the restless sounds of a camp deprived of its only joy, snoring, shuffling, the soft weeping of someone who just found a frozen beet in their bedroll. And then, an idea. It's terrible. It's desperate. It involves honey, fermented root mash, and a questionable jar of berries you found behind the latrine that may have fermented themselves. But it's a glimmer, a hope, a dream. You whisper to no one, "I will brew again." And the gods, if they're listening, are either amused or deeply, deeply concerned. Either way, the longhouse is dry, and the cold just got a little colder. There are many ways to suffer in the far northern winter, but nothing quite prepares you for the moment you realise the communal latrine has become a frozen monument to failure. It starts small, a suspicion, a hesitation, a suspicious creak underfoot, but soon you're face to face with the most ancient and unholy terror of pre-modern living, the backed-up, iced-over, wind-whipped Viking toilet trench. In warmer months, the latrine is simple and efficient, a shallow pit dug just far enough from the longhouse to prevent unwanted aromas from mingling with your stew. You squat, you pray to Thor for balance, and you move on with your day, hopefully with all your toes. But in winter, the rules change. Everything changes. Bodily functions do not stop for snowdrifts, and what was once a manageable daily routine becomes a dangerous expedition into the icy unknown. The first clue came when someone returned from the outhouse with eyes wide and silent trauma written across their face. No words, just a slow, haunted nod. And then the rumours began. The trench was full, not metaphorically full, geologically full, packed tight like the world's worst glacier, layered with alternating strata of waste and snow, fossilised in a way that future archaeologists will deeply regret discovering. You try not to believe it, of course. You hope it's just a hallucination caused by expired fish stew or residual mushroom vapours, but you know, deep down, in the frozen depths of your bowels, that your time is coming. The next morning you find yourself staring down the narrow path to the latrine. It snowed again, visibility is low, the wind whispers secrets you wish you hadn't heard. You wrap your wool cloak tighter, tuck in your tunic, and begin the long trudge, every step a squeaky crunch of snow underfoot, every gust of wind a cruel reminder that exposed skin is a luxury you cannot afford. Upon arrival, you're met with a scene so bleak, so hopeless, that even the gods would avert their eyes. The trench has turned into a frozen shelf of misery. No more soft earth, no forgiving pit, just a glistening stratified slab of permafrost and poor decisions, glittering faintly with frost and shame. You try anyway, you chip at it with a stick, then a shovel, then a cursed rune-marked axe. Nothing yields. It's like trying to tunnel through hell's own kitchen floor. Desperation sets in. Some begin scouting alternative locations. The woods, the edge of the goat shed, even behind the meat-drying racks. But none of these are solutions. They're just new locations for deeply regrettable experiences. Historical records, sparse as they are on Viking bathroom etiquette, suggest that latrines were often reused over multiple seasons. In theory, the pit could be burned out or refilled when spring came, if you made it that far. But winter had no such luxuries. If you didn't plan ahead or dig deep enough before the first freeze, you were quite literally up a frozen creek without a paddle, just a stick. Maybe. Soon the camp's usual hierarchy collapses under the strain. Latrine diplomacy breaks down. New territories are claimed. Someone constructs a bizarre outhouse contraption with a slanted log, a hole hacked through a tree stump, and an optimistic leather seat cover that freezes solid within hours. You give it one try. It feels like kissing a glacier with your hindquarters. Never again. You're not alone in your suffering. Others mutter, "Pace," and cross their legs as if performing a sacred dance. You share glances of mutual agony. The elders propose rationing stew to reduce output, but this merely increases general grumpiness and the likelihood of someone snapping and going rogue. Eventually someone attempts fire. A torch is lowered cautiously into the trench in hopes of thawing a usable section. What happens next is a matter of some debate, but the smell alone becomes legendary. The latrine is henceforth declared a no-fire zone, a rare official decree enforced by glares and gagging. You adapt. You learn to time your visits carefully, to balance on narrow logs with the poise of a drunk squirrel, to identify which snowdrifts are safe and which are deceptive layers of past regrets. You develop a sixth sense, not for danger, but for privacy, because nothing screams vulnerability like squatting in -20 degrees while the wind howls through your most sacred parts. And then there are the truly dark moments, the nights when you wake up and realise it's too far to walk, when the outhouse is unreachable, when the snow is knee-deep and the stars mock you from above. In those times, you become inventive. You eye the empty stew pot, the cracked wooden bowl, the goat shed corner. Your shame freezes before your dignity does. It is in these bleak, frigid days that you come to understand a great truth of Viking life. It wasn't just war and weather that tested the Norse spirit. It was the daily, thankless battle to perform life's most basic tasks without losing a toe, your balance, or your will to live. The latrine crisis was more than inconvenience. It was existential. But the crisis, like all things, passes. A particularly determined soul rediscovers the shovel buried beneath the snow pile and digs a new pit beside the old one. A fire is carefully lit at the base, tended like a newborn, coaxing warmth into the earth until it yields. You cheer, you weep, you make offerings of thanks to the gods of digestion. There is a new trench now, deeper, wider, with planks laid for comfort and a wooden windbreak painted with cheerful runes. It's not luxurious, but it's progress. You visit it daily, like a shrine. You treat it with reverence, and you never again take for granted the miracle of a functional hole in the ground. Because survival in the north isn't about great battles or epic sagas. It's about moments like this, when the wind is biting, your bladder is full, and the latrine isn't frozen shut. These are the victories worth singing about, quietly, while squatting. By now your body is 40% snowmelt, 30% pickled fish, and the rest is shame and survival instinct. You've outlasted the mead drought. You've endured the Great Frozen Latrine Crisis with your dignity partially intact. But tonight is soup night. Now, this sounds comforting at first, like something warm and soothing, ladled gently into a wooden bowl by a grandmotherly figure who smells of herbs and secret hugs. That is not this soup. In the Viking winter camp, soup is not a dish. It is an event. A chaotic, communal ritual that takes place in the longhouse smoke hall. A room with no chimney, poor airflow, and the architectural design of a giant wooden lung filled with firewood, sweat, and despair. You start to feel it hours before the soup itself appears. The temperature drops just enough to convince someone that now's a good time to light all the fires. They do, and suddenly the longhouse becomes a hot box of creosote, goat hair, and human essence. The smoke builds slowly at first, drifting lazily toward the ceiling beams. Then, with no exit, it begins to sink back down, not in waves, but in sentient clouds, like it's hunting for eyeballs and sinuses to assault. Your clothes absorb it, your nostrils revolt, your eyes water so aggressively you can't tell if you're crying from the smoke or from the smell of the soup brewing over the central fire. And oh, the soup. Viking soup is an ever-mutating brew of ingredients that are best described as not dead yet, or found under something. The cauldron is sacred, never emptied fully, only added to. Historians believe this practice, known as perpetual stew, allowed for ongoing nourishment through the winter months, which is a poetic way of saying this soup has memory. It remembers mistakes. Tonight's version is thick with weeks of layered decision-making. You can detect old onions, dry fish bones, sprigs of moss, a disoriented beetle, and a haunting aftertaste of whatever was scraped off a shield 2 days ago. Some say the flavour is earthy, Others say feral. You say nothing, because your mouth is full of lukewarm tuber paste, and your will to live is slipping under the bench. It's served communally, of course. Everyone gathers in the smoke-thick gloom, ladling slop into shared bowls. The ladle is communal. The bowl may be too. You've stopped asking. The smoke stings, the benches are damp, and the stew has the texture of pre-chewed wool. Still, you eat. Because calories mean survival, and somewhere in this bowl might be the thing that keeps you from freezing to death tomorrow. At some point, someone adds a dried fish head for flavour. Another tosses in a chunk of dried seaweed, followed by a blob of something they swear is seal butter. The smell shifts, the smoke gets thicker. A child sneezes and causes a brief avalanche of soot from the rafters. You can't see the fire anymore, but you feel it. Every breath is like inhaling soup-flavoured fog. The walls sweat. You sweat. Someone faints gently into the corner, only to be propped back up and handed a bowl like it's part of the process. Historically, Viking longhouses were built with central hearths and high roofs, but they often lacked chimneys, which meant smoke vented out through roof holes, or didn't. Archaeological digs of Norse homes suggest layers of soot built up over winters, coating walls, beams, and human lungs alike. Smoke inhalation was not a side effect. It was a lifestyle. You try to sit close to the exit flap, but that area is claimed by the elders, who've earned the right to breathe slightly less ash after years of frostbite and spiritual haunting. You find a spot next to the goat, whose eyes say, "We are the same now." The goat eats from your bowl. You let it. As the night progresses, the noise level rises. Someone starts a drinking song, even though there is no drink. Someone else joins in, coughing rhythmically through the chorus. A third person begins yelling about a dream involving a giant turnip and a flaming raven. You nod. That makes sense. Every now and then a spoon disappears into the soup and doesn't come back. You swear you hear it clink against something metallic far below. Perhaps an ancient coin, a long-lost brooch, or the remains of someone who fell in last week. The cauldron accepts all. Eventually a small miracle occurs. A piece of meat. Real meat. Probably. It's stringy, unidentifiable, and might be possum adjacent, but it's yours. You savour it like a king feasting on roast boar. Then you realise it's just a boiled leather strap and someone's missing a sandal. After the meal comes digestion, a communal act in itself. The warmth of the stew wrestles with your guts. The smoke clings to your skin. You feel a strange floating sensation, like your body is ascending. But it's just the carbon monoxide. You lie down next to 6 other people and the goat, using a fish-smelling cloak as a pillow. The soup sloshes in your belly like a cursed potion. But despite everything, the coughing fits, the mildew, the ongoing eye-watering, there's comfort here. You're fed. You're warm, sort of. You're surrounded by others who are equally baffled by the soup's composition and equally resigned to its reign. And tomorrow the cauldron will still be there, waiting, thickening, evolving, learning. Because in a Viking winter survival camp, food isn't about flavour, it's about endurance. You don't eat to thrive. You eat to outlast the blizzard, the hunger, and the haunted latrine ghosts. You eat to make it to the next miserable morning, where perhaps, just perhaps, the soup will contain something you recognise, like a turnip, or your missing spoon, or the last shred of your former life before the winter swallowed everything but the smoke, the goat, and the soup that refuses to die. You wake up in the longhouse, mouth tasting like fermented spoon, head full of soup fog, and lungs lined with a suspicious amount of smoke residue. Your body aches in places you didn't know had nerve endings, and your left eye appears to have fused shut. But that's not why the air feels weird. Number today is different. The air buzzes. Not literally, though it does smell faintly of beeswax and something vaguely singed. It's the kind of morning where the mood in camp isn't about survival, it's about sacrifice. Because today the elders are holding a blot. Now, in Viking terms, a blot is a ritual sacrifice to appease the gods. Thor for strength, Freyr for fertility, Odin for unknowable cosmic meddling. Sometimes it's just a thank you for not killing us ceremony. Other times it's more of a please stop killing us offering. Today it's definitely the latter. The winter has gone long. The fish traps are empty. The goat has stopped making eye contact. Something must be done. You don't argue. No one argues. When the elders get that look, that we're about to smear blood on things and chant near fire look, you grab your dampest cloak and join the slow march to the ceremonial circle. It's not far. Just past the frozen latrine pit, around the charred remains of the last mead barrel, and through the grove of trees that look suspiciously like they're judging you. The snow here is deeper, softer, hungrier. The altar is a large flat stone blackened from centuries of hopeful offerings. Someone's cleared it of snow and decorated it with bones and pine branches. There's a fire crackling nearby, more smoke naturally, and a ring of half-frozen onlookers wrapped in layers of wool, fur and emotional detachment. The elders stand at the centre, draped in ceremonial cloaks that smell like herbs, death and last year's stew. One of them holds a large wooden bowl. Another carries a knife that has definitely seen things. You shift uneasily. You're not being sacrificed, probably, but that doesn't stop your stomach from making anxious wail noises. Historically, blot ceremonies range from humble offerings of food and ale to full-blown animal sacrifices, often held at seasonal festivals like Yule. In some cases, these rituals were private, performed at homesteads, but larger communal blots were serious affairs aimed at securing divine favour for the entire community, especially in winter, especially when things got desperate. And things have definitely gotten desperate. The elders begin chanting, low, gravelly, rhythmically off-key. You think you recognise some of the words, but they've been mutated by smoke, age, and possibly fermented fish logic. Still, the effect is oddly powerful. The entire camp stands silent, breath fogging in the cold, eyes fixed on the altar. Even the wind holds back, as if waiting to see what will bleed. Then comes the offering. It's not a person. Everyone exhales. It's the goat. Now, not the goat. The one who shares the longhouse and occasionally licks soup out of your hand like you're its sad little brother. No, this is the other goat. The one that bites ankles and once tried to climb the food rack during a snowstorm. No one's particularly sad to see it tied to the post. Even the main goat seems indifferent. The ritual begins. One elder steps forward and murmurs a few last incantations into the goat's ear. The goat appears unimpressed. Then, with surprising precision, the knife flashes, and the deed is done. Blood spills into the wooden bowl. The other elder dips a bundle of pine twigs into it and begins flinging droplets across the circle, like a Norse Jackson Pollock, blessing everyone with red flecks of agricultural hope and mild hepatitis. You get hit squarely in the forehead. It's warm, you do not flinch. That's how people get accused of cursing the harvest. You're part of it now. The ritual continues. The blood is smeared on the altar, on tools, on foreheads, on the firewood pile, and, mysteriously, on the goat shed door. Someone sings a droning tune that sounds like it might be about the sun coming back, or possibly about turnips. You stand there, ankle deep in snow and goat essence, trying not to pass out from hunger or awe. At some point, someone throws a handful of barley into the fire. It hisses. Everyone gasps. You do too. You don't know why, but it seems safer to mimic the group. Another offering is made, this time of food. A hunk of dried fish, a blackened loaf of bread, a bowl of the infamous soup. These are laid out reverently at the altar and immediately freeze solid. You wonder what god exactly is accepting that particular soup, and if perhaps they're trying to quit. Then the fire is stoked higher, and someone brings out the mead substitute. Not real mead. You haven't seen that in weeks, but a concoction brewed from pine sap, snowmelt, and something fermented in a sock. It's passed around anyway. You sip. You cry a little. You pretend it's spiritual. As the fire roars, the ceremony shifts. The elders begin speaking of omens, dreams, and signs in the snow. One claims to have seen a raven with 3 wings. Another swears the wind spoke her name last night. You nod solemnly. You've been seeing weird things too. One of your dreams involved a walrus wearing a crown made of cheese, probably significant. Then comes the part you've been dreading. The voluntary offerings. Not blood, not soup, not your last sock, but something valuable, something personal. One by one, camp members step forward and place their meagre treasures at the altar. A carved comb, a shard of amber, a worn wool mitten. You stare at your belongings. You own 1 spoon, half a sandal, a rock that vaguely resembles a sheep, and a string of beads made from fish bones. You pick the beads. The rock feels too important. You place the beads on the altar. The elder nods. The goat nods. You feel lighter. Colder, but lighter. Eventually the fire burns low. The smoke drifts upward into the grey sky. The goat carcass is taken for cooking, because even sacred meat gets eaten when there's frost on your eyebrows, and nothing left in the stew pot but broth and memory. As the ceremony winds down, people drift back toward the longhouse in reverent silence. The snow begins again, fat, slow flakes falling like forgiveness. You trudge behind the others, soup bowl in hand, blood on your face, beads on the altar, and the faint taste of pine sock wine on your tongue. You're still cold, still hungry. But you feel something else now, something ancient and strange. Maybe it's connection, maybe it's carbon monoxide. But one thing is certain, you have survived another day in the Viking winter, just barely, blessed, blood-spattered, and slightly more flammable than when the day began. By now, you've stopped measuring time in days and started tracking it by disasters. There was the Great Mead shortage, the frozen latrine collapse, the smoke hall soup massacre, and the goat blood baptism. You've lived through all of it, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared you for the snowshoe incident of 842. It begins, as many tragedies do, with good intentions and questionable footwear. The snow has reached its apathetic phase. It no longer falls like a gentle hush, but descends like an avalanche with commitment issues. Every step outside feels like stepping into the embrace of a giant, soggy wool sock. Cold, dense, and riddled with regret. And since the camp's winter stores are running lower than anyone would like to admit out loud, someone has decided, or more accurately, everyone has vaguely agreed in silence, that someone needs to go out and hunt. The hunt means travel, and travel means snowshoes. Now, Viking snowshoes were not the sleek aerodynamic contraptions you might be picturing. These weren't precision-engineered carbon fibre frames, but rather flattened loops of bent birchwood lashed together with animal gut and hope. Some were round, others oval, depending on regional style and whether the maker had given up halfway through the design process. In some Norse regions, skis were also used. Long planks of wood strapped to your feet and paired with a single pole. But snowshoes remained a staple, especially in deep inland snow, where even skis would sink like a guilty raider returning from a failed monastery looting. Your pair, if you can call it that, are not a match set. One is clearly made from birch, the other from something more experimental, possibly driftwood, possibly part of a shield. Both are lashed to your boots using straps that were once part of a deer. They creak ominously as you step into the snow. You walk like a newborn elk learning ballet. The first 10 steps go well enough. Snowshoeing, after all, is not about grace. It's about distributing your weight in a way that prevents you from sinking up to your eyebrows in powder, which is exactly what happens on step 11. The left shoe slips, the right one catches. Your legs do something unholy. There is a moment where you swear your spine audibly negotiates with gravity, and then you're down, flat on your back, snow in your ears. Your breath fogs into the sky in a perfect little puff of shame. But you get back up. Because in Viking winter camp, dignity is optional. Movement is survival. You press on. The terrain is not helping. The wind has sculpted the snow into chaotic ridges and surprise pits. Every few meters, a crust of ice breaks underfoot with the delicate crunch of failure. The sun, which only briefly graces the sky this time of year, glares down like it's disappointed in you. There are trees, of course, but they offer no cover, just frosty branches that drop clumps of snow onto your neck every time you dare to feel warm. You try to keep a rhythm, step, shift, breathe, curse, but the snowshoes have their own agenda. They tangle, they flop, they catch on hidden roots and ghost antlers buried in the drifts. At one point, you attempt a graceful pivot, and instead perform a manoeuvre historians would later categorise as a horizontal interpretive plunge. Snowshoes, you learn, are not designed for speed, nor for style. They are the winter equivalent of dragging two unwilling sleds behind your ankles, but they do keep you from sinking, mostly. And then the wind picks up. It howls through the trees like a pack of angry fjord spirits. Snow whips across your vision. The cold pierces your clothing, burrows under your tunic, and sets up a small Viking settlement along your lower back. You trudge forward, teeth clenched, every step an act of rebellion against physics and common sense. You're not sure how far you go. Distance is meaningless. Time is frozen solid. Your left snowshoe detaches twice. Your right one attempts to commit treason by flipping backward. You consider leaving them behind, but that's how people die. Slowly, quietly, and waist-deep in regret near a frozen rabbit track. At some point you spot movement. Not prey, not hope, just one of your fellow snowshoers. They're lying flat, legs splayed, face covered in snow, radiating the energy of someone who tried to invent skiing using rotten barrel staves. You pass them a solemn nod. No words, just shared trauma. In the end, the hunt is fruitless. No deer, no boar. Just a few extremely fast birds and one suspicious squirrel that stared into your soul and then disappeared into a snowbank with more dignity than you'll ever possess. You find a stick. You pick it up. It's not food, but it's symbolic. You turn back. The return journey is worse. The snowshoes, now soggy and vengeful, slap your legs with every step. You fall into a drift. Twice. You find a frozen creek and try to cross it, only to slip and slide 10 feet, in what might generously be described as an involuntary sledding event. Your limbs are numb, your spirit is cracked, your backside is now 40% bruising, and then, miracle of miracles, you see the camp. Smoke curls from the longhouse roof hole. The goat is standing near the edge of the snow wall, chewing on something that might be your dignity. You shuffle back into camp like a frostbitten revenant, trailing broken snowshoe bits and enough ice crystals to qualify as your own weather system. Inside, the warmth hits like a warhammer. The longhouse is loud, smoky, and smells like soup, sweat, and faintly of roasted pine squirrel. You collapse onto the nearest fur pile. Someone hands you a chunk of frozen bread. You don't eat it. You just hold it for emotional support. You've survived the snowshoe incident. The legend will spread. Not because of your bravery or skill, but because your tumble into the creek was witnessed by at least 3 people, one of whom reenacted it with a turnip and 2 spoons. By morning, the tale will have grown to include wolves, a falling tree, and you briefly achieving flight. You accept this. In Viking life, humiliation is just another form of bonding, and so you recover. Slowly. The blisters fade, the bruises bloom, the snowshoes are retired to a corner of the longhouse, leaning ominously like cursed relics. You glance at them occasionally, just to remind yourself what survival really looks like. Wooden ovals, soaked in goat sinew, laced with terror and snow. Because in the Viking winter, you don't just fight the cold, you fight gravity, terrain, primitive footwear, and your own overconfidence. You learn the hard way that every step is a gamble, every fall a saga, and every snowshoe trip a lesson in humility wrapped in frostbite. Tomorrow you'll be asked to go again, and tomorrow you'll say yes, because you're not dead yet, and that counts for something. You'd like to think you've become a seasoned survivor by now. You've endured the sacred goat blood flinging, the communal soup hallucinations, and at least 3 public snowshoe-related humiliations. Your hair permanently smells like smoked moss, and your skin has adapted to a texture somewhere between jerky and tree bark. You are, by most definitions, still alive. But no matter how hardened you think you are, you're not ready for the sock situation. It starts with a feeling, a subtle tickling sensation in your left boot. You assume it's just a straw fibre poking through the fabric, maybe a pebble, maybe your last working toe giving up the ghost. You adjust. You ignore. You continue stacking firewood with the grim focus of someone pretending to enjoy existing. But the tickle comes back, this time sharper. It dances across your heel with the enthusiasm of a flea on mead. You take off your boot. What you find inside is a horror. Your sock is moving. Now. Not dramatically. It's not sprinting across the floor or trying to vote in local assemblies, but it twitches when you touch it. And the inside, it's alive. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, biologically, microbially, maybe even militarily. You hold the sock up to the firelight. Threads unravel like worms fleeing a shipwreck. There's visible fuzz that wasn't there before. Something squelches. You drop it instantly. The camp elders had warned you, in the way only Norse elders can, vaguely, ominously, and with enough metaphor to obscure any actual advice. Something about, beware the wool rot, and he who sleeps in wet socks shall dream of hell. You'd laughed then. Not anymore. Historically, Viking socks were crafted from coarse wool, or woven using a technique called knoll binding, a kind of prehistoric knitting that produces dense, durable fabric. In theory, they were warm. In practice, they were rarely washed. Feet were wrapped, not pampered. Water was cold, soap was rare, and fungal infections were just part of the charm. Yours have evolved. They've soaked in weeks of sweat, snow melt, spilled soup, and that time you stepped in something that might have been fish, or might have been goat. They've congealed into crusty tubes of misery that no longer function as clothing so much as passive-aggressive roommates. You suspect they hold grudges, possibly intelligence. You try to dry them over the fire. This releases a smell that defies all known categories. Not entirely organic, but not chemical either. It's sharp, sour, and strangely damp, like burnt cheese wrapped in wet leather and shame. Everyone in the longhouse turns to glare. The goat leaves voluntarily. You consider discarding them, but winter doesn't allow that kind of luxury. Socks are survival. Wool insulates even when wet, and though yours are now more swamp than textile, they're still the only thing standing between your feet and the endless icy void. You try to clean them. You head to the icy stream with a rock and what passes for soap, a greyish lump made from rendered fat and herbs you don't recognise. The water stings like truth. Your hands go numb within seconds. You slap the socks against the rock and they respond by stiffening into frozen paddles. One cracks. The other just laughs at you in fungus. You bring them back, defeated. Someone suggests drying them in the smoke hall again. Someone else recommends sprinkling ashes inside for cleansing. Another person says just bury them and pray. You do all three. For a moment it works. The socks return to a texture somewhat resembling fabric. You wear them again, cautiously. They feel stiff but stable, like walking on lightly cursed parchment. Then the itching starts. At first it's mild, manageable, a little wriggle near the toes, but by nightfall you're scratching like a chicken possessed. You remove your socks again. The inside is alive. Not visibly, no obvious worms or critters, but biologically thriving in a way that suggests they may soon apply for status as a separate species. You try heating them to death. You place them directly on the edge of the hearthstone. They smoulder, they hiss, they release a noise like a dying beetle whispering regrets. You flip them, they crackle ominously. One bursts into brief flame, which you stomp out using a boot full of snow. They're dry now, horribly dry. You could use them as kindling, but you still put them on. Because in Viking winter, everything is a negotiation with dignity and frostbite, and dignity has been losing for weeks. Wearing them again is like encasing your feet in angry bread crust. Every step is a crunch. Your heels rub raw. The seams scratch like betrayal. But your feet are warm-ish. And in this climate, that counts as a victory. The next morning you wake to a new horror. Your socks have frozen to the fur bedding. You have to peel them off gently, like separating rawhide from a bear. The sound they make is deeply personal. Half sigh, half shriek. You're not sure whether it came from the socks or your soul. There's a moment of silent contemplation. You stare at the socks stare back. You understand each other now. You've been through too much together. They may be alive, they may be haunted, they may contain trace amounts of goat fungus, but they are yours. And no one, not the cold, not the soup, not even the gods, can take them from you now. Because Viking winter survival isn't just about fire and food, it's about relationships. You've learned to live with the longhouse smell. You've learned to accept the latrine fate. And now you've forged a truce with the most feared, most intimate foe of all. Your own wool socks, the ones that itch, bite, squelch, and whisper during the night. The ones that keep you warm when everything else has given up. The ones that may one day rise up and consume your feet entirely. But until that day comes, you walk on. You've grown used to the cold. Not in the sense that you're immune to it. Your fingers still tingle like dying carrots, and your nose has begun threatening mutiny every night. But you've accepted the cold as a sort of abusive housemate. It insults you, kicks snow in your bedroll, and occasionally steals your spoon, but it's always there. You've even made peace with the latrine, the soup, the goat, and the socks that may or may not be sentient. But there's one thing no one makes peace with. The wolves. You heard them the first week. Distant howls rising from the tree line like a cold wind wrapped in teeth. Everyone heard it. No one acknowledged it. In Viking winter, if you admit something scary exists, it becomes your job to deal with it. So the strategy is to nod once, tighten your cloak, and mutter something about forest spirits until the topic dies of frostbite. But the wolves didn't get the memo, because now they're getting bold. It starts with tracks. Huge, silent, unnervingly close to camp. You spot them one morning while collecting firewood just past the edge of the snow wall. 4-toed prints, large enough that you could set a soup bowl inside one. Not that you would, because that soup belongs to the longhouse, and there would be consequences. You try to convince yourself it's just a large dog, a large, spooky, well-organised dog that's clearly casing your camp like a Roman scout. You bring it up to others, cautiously. No one says anything. But that night the elders double the watch rotation and throw extra bones on the communal fire, not for warmth, but as an offering. Not to the gods, mind you, to the forest. Historically, wolves were both feared and revered in Norse culture. They prowled the myths. Fenrir, the wolf fated to kill Odin during Ragnarok, was chained by the gods themselves. But real wolves, they were opportunists, smart, patient, and terrifyingly efficient. During hard winters, they'd draw closer to human settlements, picking off livestock, sniffing out scraps, and sometimes, if they were desperate enough, testing the walls. You've got walls, sort of. Snowbanks, stacked wood, a makeshift fence reinforced with fish bones and optimism. But the wolves don't respect architecture. They respect opportunity. It escalates slowly. A few missing scraps. A pelt dragged off into the dark. Then one morning, the goat is wide-eyed and unusually quiet, which is terrifying. You follow its gaze to a tree stump near the edge of camp where a paw print now rests, fresh and steaming. It's the size of your face. That night you don't sleep. None of you do. The fire is built high, and the longhouse smells like panic and burned fish oil. Every gust of wind sounds like footsteps. Every creak of wood becomes a growl. You clutch your cloak tighter, but you know it won't help. If the wolves come, wool won't save you. And then, around midnight, you hear it. Close. Not a howl, not the long, mournful song of the lonely hunter, but a low chuff, a bark, a warning. They're here. Not hunting yet. Just watching, testing. Someone outside hurls a log. The sound it makes as it hits the snow is answered by silence. A silence so heavy it seems to press against the walls, as if the wolves are leaning in, just listening. The next morning the tracks are everywhere. Around the meat rack, beside the goat pen. One set leads up to the longhouse door and then away again. You don't find the courage to ask why there are only 5 toes in that particular print. You try to be brave, you build the fire higher, you hum songs under your breath when walking alone. You sharpen a stick into a kind of pretend spear, mostly symbolic, deeply unhelpful. You avoid the tree line. You don't make eye contact with the shadows. The elders organise a wolf watch. One person posted at the fire throughout the night, armed with a torch, a bone club, and the haunting knowledge that they're really just bait with a better view. You take your shift eventually, staring into the dark with eyes that refuse to blink. Your torch crackles, the snow creaks. Once, just once, you swear you see a pair of eyes reflecting the firelight. Yellow, unblinking. You don't check again. A few days pass without incident. You think maybe they've moved on. Maybe they've found a slower, tastier village. You almost feel hopeful. Then the chickens vanish. Not killed, vanish. No feathers, no blood. Just a scattered line of prints leading into the woods. The goat becomes increasingly nervous. You relate. Then the real event happens. You're returning from the stream, balancing 2 buckets of ice water when you hear it. Low, fast rustling. Not wind, not snow. Movement. You stop. The trees ahead shift slightly, and out of the brush, a shape bolts into view. Wolf, not the whole pack, just one. You freeze. The buckets drop. The water splashes, instantly turning to slush at your feet. You do not run. Running is how you make yourself a chew toy. You stare. It stares. There's a moment, frozen in time, colder than fear, where you realise it's not afraid of you. Then it turns, and disappears back into the forest. You don't tell anyone. You don't have to. They already know. The wolves are bold now, and bold wolves are dangerous wolves. Historically, wolf attacks on humans were rare, but not impossible. In harsh winters, with prey scarce and hunger sharp, wolves could take greater risks, and Vikings, often spread thin across isolated homesteads with limited walls and even more limited heating, were not immune. Bones have been found bearing bite marks. Sagas mention wolves dragging away the weak, the old, the unlucky. You are feeling increasingly unlucky. So the camp adapts. Fire pits are moved closer to the perimeter. A second wall of logs is hastily built. You sleep with your knife tucked into your sock, though realistically, if the wolves come for you, the sock will be the first casualty. The goat is brought inside the longhouse. It seems fine with this. You're less fine. Every night is now a test of nerves. Every crackle outside could be wind or death. You learn to sleep in shallow spurts, eyes half open, ears twitching at every sound. And yet, nothing happens. Not yet. Just the knowing. The awareness that something smarter than you, hungrier than you, colder than you, is watching, waiting, studying. That every step you take outside the fire's reach might be your last. Because in the Viking winter, the wolves don't need to attack you outright. They just need to convince you that they might. The fear does the rest. And in that way, silently, patiently, efficiently, and they win. It's midwinter now, technically, but midwinter is not a real point in time. It's a hallucination conjured by people desperate to believe the sun is coming back. You've stopped measuring the days. Time is no longer counted in sunrises or sunsets, but in how many times someone has burned their fingers on the soup pot, and how many toes have turned a concerning shade of violet. The longhouse is different now. Not quieter, not louder, just twitchier. Eyes linger too long. Laughter turns sharp around the edges. Someone muttered, "The goat's watching us again yesterday," and no one questioned it. Because they were right. This is the madness season. When the cold doesn't just nip at your fingers, it seeps into your thoughts. Boredom festers in the smoke-soaked walls, and all that's left between you and complete psychological combustion is a half-frozen seal carcass that someone dragged into camp like it was a prize-winning boar. You don't know where it came from. You didn't ask. By the time you returned from the latrine trench, which now has icicles, by the way, it was already on the prep table, half-thawed, glistening, and surrounded by an unnerving amount of anticipation. Seal is not common fare in the inland camps, but in desperate winters, Viking coastal dwellers hunted them for fat, a dense, calorie-rich survival miracle that could be rendered into oil or eaten outright. And now someone has bartered or found or possibly hallucinated one into existence. It smells like wet leather and ocean ghosts, but it's meat. Sort of. You're told, again without words, that tonight is a feast, and what a feast it is. The fat is the star of the show. Slabs of it, sliced into trembling cubes, dropped into bubbling cauldrons of soup, and sizzling directly on hot stones over the fire. The sound is incredible, a symphony of crackles, pops, and what might be distant weeping. The smell is harder to describe. Imagine if a candle melted into a fish and then married a wet dog. But worse. You eat anyway, because you're hungry, because you're tired of soup that tastes like boiled boot memories, because seal fat is warm, and warmth is now a currency more valuable than gold. The texture is challenging, chewy on the outside, liquefied on the inside, with the mouthfeel of something that once had ambitions of being butter, but got lost in the sea. You chew and chew and chew, and eventually give up and just swallow. It sticks to your ribs, and your fingers, and somehow, emotionally, to your soul. You're not the only one having a reaction. The goat vomits in the corner. One elder begins laughing for a full 10 minutes and then immediately falls asleep with their hand still in the bowl. A small child starts speaking only in riddles about snowflakes and bones, and yet no one stops eating. Because this is midwinter, and in the Norse world this is the part where you either go a little mad, or you go a little colder, and between the two, madness wins every time. You try to sleep that night, but the fat sits in your belly like a burning candle made of regret. Your dreams are vivid. You see seals with human eyes. You see yourself as a seal, basking on an ice floe, slowly melting into lard while the goat judges you from a passing iceberg. You wake up sweating under your cloak and find that someone has stuffed another piece of fat into your hand. You eat it anyway. The days that follow are even stranger. The longhouse becomes a pressure cooker, literally and metaphorically. The fat is rendered into oil, which is then used to coat tools, hands, even walls in an attempt to keep out the cold. It works, sort of. Everything now glistens like a waxed pig. Someone uses it as hair product. That someone now has hair shaped like a windswept pine tree. Someone else starts singing to the oil lamp. The goat develops an oily sheen and an unsettling sense of entitlement. By the third day, you've forgotten what hunger feels like. You're simply filled, not nourished, not satisfied, just filled, with a substance not entirely meant for human internal plumbing. The seal fat has become part of you. You sweat it. You breathe it. When you burp, the smoke hall becomes a crime scene. And yet, there is life here. Energy, laughter, strange and wild. One night, someone choreographs a seal fat dance near the fire. It involves slapping thighs and chanting nonsense syllables. You join in without knowing why, because in the deepest cold you don't just need heat, you need release. And so you dance, you feast. You slide across the slick floorboards with your feet wrapped in greasy wool and your stomach full of melting marine biology. Because survival in the Viking winter camp isn't just a matter of food or fire. It's endurance of the mind. You must outlast the boredom. You must outlast the others. You must outlast the part of you that wants to just wander into the snow and let the wolves sort it out. And you do. With seal fat dripping from your chin and madness coiling behind your eyes, you do. By the end of the week, the seal is gone. Every inch consumed, rendered, or possibly worshipped. The longhouse quiets down. The fire dims. The goat sleeps again without growling. And though the cold remains, as constant as ever, something feels different. You've passed a threshold, the kind of invisible line only recognised by those who've stared madness in the eye and fed it oily fish. And somehow, you feel stronger, Heavier, yes. Slipperier, absolutely, but stronger. You never meant to antagonize the goat. No one did, really. It was just there, from the beginning, wandering in and out of the longhouse like it paid rent, chewing things that were definitely not food, and staring at everyone with the haunted eyes of a creature that had seen too many winters and too few good decisions. At first, it was just annoying. Goats are a staple of Norse survival. Hardy, low maintenance, and full of milk, meat, and opinions. Archaeological evidence shows they were raised throughout the Viking world, often sharing living space with humans in longhouses during brutal winters. Their droppings were tolerated, their milk was bartered, their meat avoided for as long as possible because nobody wanted to explain to the children why the family therapist was suddenly missing. But something changed. You're not sure when it began. The shift from background livestock to subtle antagonist. Maybe it was after the latrine froze and someone blamed the goat for hogging the only warm corner. Or maybe it was when the soup got weirdly chewy, and no one could agree if that had been a mistake or a statement. Whatever the cause, one morning, the goat simply stopped pretending. It took a seat by the fire, not near the fire, by the fire, centre stage, like it owned the longhouse. Everyone noticed. No one said a word. The next day it ate someone's boot, whole, with eye contact. The day after that it headbutted the soup cauldron during dinner and was applauded. The elders claimed it was a sign. You weren't so sure. You just started sleeping with your boots under your shirt. Then, one fateful afternoon, came the event historians would one day refer to, if they had any sense of drama, as the Great Goat Rebellion. It begins with a noise, not a bleat, nothing so ordinary. This was more of a guttural declaration, a sound that echoed through the longhouse like an ancient horn being blown inside a wine barrel full of arrogance. You sit up from your fur mat, crusty-eyed and soup-lagged, just in time to see the goat standing on the longhouse table. All 4 hooves squarely planted in someone's dinner. It's chewing on a piece of scroll. No one knows where the scroll came from. It doesn't matter. What matters is the look in its eyes. Defiant, unapologetic, woolly vengeance. Then it charges. The goat leaps off the table, horns low, straight into the fire pit, scattering sparks and sending the cooking pot clattering into a pile of startled limbs. The stew splashes. Someone screams. Someone else cheers. The goat emerges from the steam like a demon from a sauna, smoking slightly, covered in carrot pulp, and angrier than before. It sprints the length of the longhouse, knocks over 3 people, headbutts a pile of dried fish, and escapes out the front flap like a fugitive with unfinished business. The camp erupts into chaos. This is no longer just a goat, this is a movement. The next few hours are tense. You help gather supplies, ropes, snowshoes, a fish-stained net, and a half-rotted turnip to use as bait. A hunting party is formed, which is ridiculous, because you're not hunting a wild animal. You're trying to reclaim a roommate with a superiority complex. You track the hoof prints through the snow. They're easy to follow, not because the goat is clumsy, but because it wants to be found. You can tell. The tracks meander through the woods, past the frozen latrine, around the abandoned firewood pile and directly onto the roof of the goat shed. Somehow. There it is, standing proud, looking down on you like a minor deity of inconvenience. The first attempt to catch it fails. The second attempt fails louder. The third ends with someone getting knocked flat into a drift and briefly questioning whether this life was really their destiny. Eventually the goat returns to camp, not because it's been caught, because it's done. It walks back into the longhouse, kicks over a bowl, and lies down on a sleeping mat. Its sleeping mat. No one tries to stop it. A new social order is born. The goat now eats first. It decides when the fire gets stoked. It gets the warmest spot by the hearth, and if it's in a bad mood, someone gets kicked. Not metaphorically, literally. You adapt. You learn to nod respectfully when it enters the room. You stop making eye contact for longer than 3 seconds. You carve a tiny wooden throne and pretend it was a joke gift. But deep down you know, this isn't your camp anymore, it's the goats. And you're just the unpaid winter interns. Historically, livestock in Viking settlements were crucial, not just for survival, but as symbols of wealth and status. A healthy goat could mean life through the winter. A misbehaving one, well, that was just part of the package. But in a cramped, smoke-choked longhouse with boredom running high and dignity running low, sometimes an animal does more than survive. Sometimes it takes over. You consider your options. You could leave. You could revolt. You could challenge the goat directly in a test of strength and leadership. You don't. You sit down, quietly, and offer it a turnip, because in the Viking winter, power doesn't always belong to the strongest warrior. Sometimes it belongs to the creature with the sharpest horns, the thickest skull, and the audacity to knock over the soup without consequences. You've learned your place, and it's 2 steps behind the goat, forever. You haven't bathed in days, weeks maybe. You've stopped counting. Partly because the passage of time no longer feels linear, and partly because bathing in a Viking winter camp isn't a chore, it's a life-threatening dare. Your skin now carries a protective layer of dirt, soot, goat dander, and seal fat residue. You like to think of it as primitive armour. Others call it smell. But you can't ignore it anymore. People are starting to avoid sitting downwind of you. The goat sneezes when you walk by. And worst of all, the elders begin talking, not with words, but with looks. Slow nods, pointed glances, the kind of collective agreement that leads to blood rituals or forced haircuts. You know what's coming, the ice bath. Historically, Norse people did care about cleanliness, more than popular myths suggest. Weekly washing was common, and public bathhouses existed in some areas. But in deep winter, with rivers frozen and firewood scarce, hygiene became a challenge. That didn't stop some communities from insisting on ritual cleansing, especially before feasts, sacrifices, or the moment someone began to smell like fermented despair. You're told, wordlessly of course, that today is your cleansing day. No one offers to help. Someone just hands you a wooden bucket and points at the stream. You trudge out of the longhouse like a condemned turnip. The air is so cold it has texture, a prickly invisible crust that crunches against your skin. The snow creaks beneath your boots. Your breath fogs into ghostly swirls. You reach the stream and see it. A small, jagged hole chiselled into the ice, rimmed with frost, looking exactly like the entrance to hell. You kneel. You dip your hand in. You immediately wish you were dead. The water isn't cold. Cold is what you felt when your soup cooled off, or when your socks got damp. This is something else entirely. This is liquid punishment. It shoots up your arm, bypassing all known nerves and directly insulting your ancestors. Your bones try to leave your body, but you're not done. You strip. Slowly. Your tunic peels off like old bark. Your underlayers stick in places they should not stick. By the time you're down to your bare skin, the wind has begun to laugh at you. You are now the coldest thing on earth that still technically has a pulse. You step into the stream, or rather you slide into the waterhole with all the grace of a fish being dropped from a tree. Your foot hits the bottom. Your entire being clenches. Every organ contracts. Your brain briefly forgets how language works. Then the full body numbness hits. Time slows. Your breath catches. You're floating in pain made of needles and Viking disappointment. You try to wash, to scrub. You slap icy water on your chest, your arms, your face. It feels like punishment. It is punishment. This is penance for every complaint you made about stew night or the goat. You think you hear Odin cackling somewhere in the clouds. Then it happens. You tip the bucket of water over your head. The moment it hits, your soul briefly exits your body. You transcend time. You see all your past regrets and your future mistakes, and they're all shivering. You scream, but the sound freezes mid-air and falls into the stream, and then it's over. You scramble out of the ice hole like a boiled crustacean, limbs flailing, skin turning 17 shades of red and regret. You grab your fur cloak, which now feels like sandpaper dipped in betrayal, and wrap yourself as best you can. The walk back is a blur. You're steaming, literally. Your body radiates heat in the way a volcano might just before going extinct. Snow sticks to you. Your boots crunch like toast. Every step is agony and possibly enlightenment. You stagger back into the longhouse. No one says anything, but they nod. And someone ladles you a bowl of warm soup. It's mostly broth, possibly fish-based. You drink it with shaking hands and a 1,000-yard stare. Congratulations. You have survived the ice bath. You're clean, technically. You smell less like despair and more like boiled human. Your pores are as tight as a coin purse. Your scalp is so clean it whistles when the wind passes over it. But you also know something now. Something the others learned long ago. That survival in the Viking winter isn't just about food or fire or avoiding being trampled by a goat with attitude. It's about enduring the rituals, the traditions, the things done not because they're necessary, but because they remind you that you're still alive. Barely, and with fewer nerve endings. You've endured the latrine collapse, the goat coup, the sentient soup, and the full-body betrayal of the ice bath. You've learned to sleep with your boots under your armpits, avoid the firewood pile after dark, and accept that the longhouse may, in fact, be slowly digesting you. But you weren't ready for this. Your tooth is trying to kill you. It starts as a twinge, nothing dramatic. Just a gentle protest from a back molar, the kind of ache you assume comes from chewing too much frozen elk jerky or accidentally biting into a piece of bone disguised as a turnip. You ignore it. You're a Viking winter survivor now. Pain is just a weather report from your body, but the twinge grows. Soon it's a throb, a heartbeat in your jaw, a drumbeat of discomfort that pulses through your skull every time you blink too hard. You try rubbing it. You try chewing on the other side. You try pretending the pain belongs to someone else entirely. The tooth does not care. It is staging a mutiny. And in this camp there is no dentist. Historically, dental care in the Viking Age was primitive. Toothpicks made of bone or wood were used. Some evidence suggests early attempts at fillings or carvings, likely decorative rather than therapeutic. But for the most part, when something in your mouth went wrong, your options were suffer, extract it with a sharp object, or pray it falls out before the infection spreads to your brain. You're about to sample all three. You try the basic methods first. Chewing snow doesn't help, just makes your face colder. Swishing warm soup feels great, until you realise the soup is half goat broth and half sadness, and now it smells like regret inside your skull. You even try pressing a hot stone against your cheek like it's some kind of spa treatment. It leaves a mark, not a cure. By the second day you can't sleep. You lie awake, jaw clenched, eyes twitching, trying not to scream. Someone mistakes your grimace for a war face and nods respectfully. You don't correct them. You can't. Your entire tongue is trying to curl into your sinus cavity to escape. You try old camp remedies. One elder hands you a paste made from crushed spruce needles, fish oil, and ash. You apply it. Your mouth smells like a pine tree that died underwater. The pain remains. Another suggests chewing willow bark. It does dull the ache, but also gives you hallucinations of a smiling goat whispering Viking proverbs. Not ideal. Then comes the final suggestion. Extraction. You nod. Not because you agree, but because your brain is short-circuiting from pain, and nodding seems safer than screaming no and accidentally getting your lips ripped off. You're told to bite down on a leather strap. The leather strap has teeth marks in it already. That's not comforting. The tool of choice is not a tool. It's a flat piece of bone sharpened into a kind of primitive chisel. One end is wrapped in twine, the other is suspiciously red. You ask no questions. You breathe through your nose. You sit on the floor while two people hold your shoulders. One holds the goat. The extraction begins. There is pressure, then pain, then a sound, not a scream. That comes later. It's the sound of something tearing, like wet bark being peeled from a tree while the tree actively objects. You hear it inside your skull. It echoes down your spine. Your other teeth recoil in horror, then mercifully silence. The tooth is out. You see it. It's not a tooth. It's a fossil. Cracked, blackened, full of holes like it hosted a small village of bacteria. You wonder how it didn't kill you in your sleep. You wonder what else is lurking inside your face. Your mouth is now full of blood, ash, and the faint taste of cooked fish. You're given a cloth to bite down on. It's not clean. It might be part of someone's old sock. You do not care. The pain is different now. Still sharp, but emptier. A vacancy in your jaw. Like your skull just lost a tenant who never paid rent but left claw marks on the furniture. You spend the night groaning softly and sipping broth. You survive. Barely. In the days that follow, you heal. The hole in your gums scabs over. The throbbing stops. The infection never sets in. A miracle, or possibly the goat's doing. You don't ask. You just chew carefully now. You treat every piece of dried fish like it's made of glass. You develop a superstition about biting into turnips. Because in the Viking winter, dental pain isn't an inconvenience. It's a siege. A slow-burning war that turns you into your worst enemy. There is no Novocaine. There is no chair that reclines. There is only snow, bones, and the willingness to scream into a fur blanket while your campmates hold you down and rip a part of your skull out with a glorified butter knife. And when it's over, you keep the tooth. You wear it on a string around your neck, not as a trophy, not as a warning, as a reminder that even in a world of wolves, blizzards, soup hallucinations, and goat uprisings, sometimes your greatest threat is hiding right behind your molars, quietly waiting for the right night to ruin your entire existence. There are moments in Viking winter survival that break the body, and then there are moments that break the spirit. This is one of the latter, because today you wake up and realise your beard has frozen into a solid, tangled monument of mucus, mead, and meat broth. You have entered the realm of the snotbeard. Now you don't have to have a beard, but let's face it, in this camp, shaving is not an option. There are no mirrors, no razors, only one shared knife, and it's already been used to open a seal carcass, de-lice someone's boot, and extract your molar last week. You wouldn't trust it near your neck. Besides, a beard is insulation, identity, protection from wind, cold, and social interaction, until it turns on you. You first notice the problem during morning chores. You're hauling ice chunks from the stream when you feel something shift on your chin. Not move, shift, as if your face hair has acquired mass, weight, density. You reach up gently and tap your beard. It makes a noise, not a rustle or a scratch, a clink, like tapping a chunk of dried sap on an old pine tree. You try to ignore it. This is a mistake. By midday, your breath has frozen into the bottom third of your face. Every exhale adds a new layer. Steam condenses on your moustache. Tiny droplets hang like winter ornaments, glimmering, delicate, and profoundly disgusting. Then your nose joins in. It starts with a slow drip. It ends in an avalanche. And in the Viking cold, snot does not drip. It freezes, instantly, mid-exit. One moment it's flowing, the next it's forming an icicle that connects your nostril to your upper lip like some kind of horrid Norse bridge. You wipe it away, but now it's stuck to your glove. You wipe the glove on your tunic. The tunic now crackles when you move. You're not a person anymore. You're a soundscape of frozen tissues. By the time you return to the longhouse, your beard has become a hardened, tangled knot of ice, phlegm, fish oil, and shame. Bits of dried soup have crusted into the strands. There's something leafy stuck near your jawline. Possibly lichen, possibly soup garnish, possibly both. You try to warm up by the fire. Another mistake. The outer layer of your beard begins to melt. Slowly, greasily. This would be good if the inner layers weren't still frozen solid. What happens next is a phenomenon known unofficially as beard steaming, where your face begins to sweat inside its own icicle shell. Steam rises from your chin like a cursed kettle. Someone nearby asks if the soup is ready. You do not respond. Historically, Viking grooming wasn't as barbaric as legend suggests. In fact, they cared deeply about personal appearance. Combs, tweezers and razors have been found in graves, often intricately carved. But that was summer behaviour. Winter grooming was pure survival, and your face right now is not surviving. It is fighting for its life. You try to fix it. You grab a wooden comb and attempt to rake through the beard. The comb snaps. You try melting it with soup steam. The smell is something between bone broth and boiled moss. A child cries softly in the corner. Someone offers you a solution, seal fat. You decline, then you accept. You rub the fat into your beard, and to your horror it works. The ice begins to loosen, sliding off in chunks that hit the floor with a slap. Your beard returns to motion. It's still stiff, still questionable. But it moves again. It breathes again. Then it drips, constantly. You now live with the terrifying realization that your beard is a sponge. Everything it encounters is absorbed, stored, fermented. The result is a portable swamp stapled to your jawline. And you're not alone. You begin noticing it in others. The elder whose beard sparkles in the firelight. That's not magic. That's crystallized broth. The hunter whose moustache is permanently parted down the middle. Frozen mucus, carved by the wind. Even the goat has a chin tuft that looks suspiciously damp. The longhouse is full of snot beards. They crunch when people laugh. They drip when people eat. They sway like hanging moss when heads turn too quickly. It's not just a phase, it's an ecosystem. You try braiding it. It freezes that way. You try trimming it. The scissors bounce off. Eventually you surrender. You wrap your entire lower face in a rag soaked in herbal tea and goat spit. It freezes into a chin mask that smells like regret. But it keeps the ice out. Mostly. Until night falls, and you wake up to find that your beard has frozen to the bed mat. Again. You must peel it off slowly, hair by hair, the sound like tearing wet parchment. You bite down on your own arm just to keep from waking the others. One eyebrow freezes halfway up your face. You leave it. This is who you are now. Because in the Viking winter, even your own face is a liability. The cold doesn't just attack your skin. It weaponizes your bodily fluids. It turns grooming into warfare. Your beard is not a fashion statement. It is a battleground, a memory log, a frozen, smelly monument to your continued failure to die. And when spring comes, if it comes, and the ice finally melts from your cheeks, you'll carry the scars with you. Not just on your skin, but on your chin. You thought you'd seen strange things already. You've eaten seal fat that glowed in the dark. You've watched a goat stage a coup. You've worn a beard made of soup, mucus, and silent despair. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for the raw, unsettling spectacle that is the Yule celebration. Now, to be clear, you didn't volunteer for this. No one ever volunteers for Yule duty. It's just your turn. And unfortunately, your job is the most dangerous, tending the ceremonial Yule log. You're not entirely sure what it is, or why it's sacred. But from what you gather, the log is meant to be burned slowly and continuously across the darkest days of winter, to keep the gods watching, the spirits soothed, and the longhouse marginally less miserable. If the flame goes out, bad things happen. No one clarifies what kind of bad things. They just stare at you for a little too long. Historically, Yule was a Norse midwinter festival steeped in superstition and symbolism. It was a time of sacrifice, feasting, and honouring ancestral spirits, often marked by the burning of a sacred log or the keeping of a hearth fire through the longest nights of the year. To let the flame die was to invite darkness not just into the home, but into the soul, which is lovely, until you're the one who has to sleep next to it. The Yule log itself is ominous. It's huge, gnarled, clearly chosen more for its spiritual presence than for its practicality. It takes 3 people to drag it into the longhouse, and by the time it's in place, you're already covered in bark, splinters, and a sense of foreboding. The log is propped carefully on the hearth and lit with kindling that smells like regret and old fish oil. The fire begins to crackle. Everyone gathers. The goat watches. Someone sings. Someone else throws a bone into the flames. You try to look reverent while wondering whether anyone has ever died from second-hand soot inhalation. Then the rules are announced. The fire must never go out, not for 1 second, and that becomes your life. You are now the guardian of the fire. You sit by it. You feed it. You stroke it with a stick like it's a cat made of wrath. You doze with one eye open, waking every time it crackles the wrong way or someone walks too close. And that's when the log begins, talking, not with words. It groans, deep ancient groans, the sound of sap bubbling and ancient curses waking up. You hear it moan at midnight. You hear it whisper during wind gusts. You tell yourself it's just the wood. Then you hear your name. You don't have the energy to panic anymore. The longhouse smells like roasted anxiety. The air thickens with smoke, grease, and the strange herbal residue of past rituals. Your tunic now carries the scent of fear and pine tar. Your hair is singed in at least 3 places, and still you sit. You poke the fire. You feed it dried moss. At one point someone offers a sliver of dried herring to honour the gods. You drop it in. The smell changes permanently. By the 3rd night you're no longer human. You're smoke-stained, soup-fed, and flame-bound. You no longer blink. You no longer flinch. The fire has become your child, your enemy, your eternal companion. You begin to whisper to it. It whispers back. Then disaster strikes. You doze off, just for a moment. Just long enough for your body to shut down after 17 straight hours of watching red-hot logs crackle like angry walnuts. You jolt awake to find the flames sputtering, a weak ember hiccup away from vanishing. You panic. You throw kindling. You throw soup. You throw the carved goat effigy someone left near the wall. The fire flares back to life, roaring with renewed fury and a faint smell of ceremonial turnip. You sit in stunned silence. The goat makes eye contact, and you know what this means. You almost ended the Yule flame, and that means you are now cursed. You don't know how or when, but you can feel it. A tickle on the back of your neck, a lingering cold in your fingertips, a sense that somewhere in the forest something has noticed your mistake. The next morning a blizzard rolls in. Not a normal snowstorm. This one feels personal, the kind of wind that slaps your soul. The snow doesn't fall, it attacks. The fire flares, the longhouse creaks. Everyone looks at you. No one says it, but they know. You failed the Yule log, and the Yule log never forgets. For the next few days things go wrong. Your mittens go missing. Your boots freeze solid overnight, indoors. The goat knocks over your soup and then sits in it. You develop a cough that sounds suspiciously like the crackling of cursed kindling. Eventually the fire is allowed to burn out. The log has been consumed. You are freed. But something lingers. The longhouse is quiet. Too quiet. The smoke doesn't drift the same way. The soup doesn't taste quite right. The goat stares longer than usual. You sleep, finally, without the fire. But your dreams are strange, smoky, wooden, filled with eyes that glow like coals and voices that chant in a dialect you don't understand. But your bones seem to remember. Because in the Viking winter nothing is just symbolic. Every log carries weight. Every ritual has teeth. And sometimes when the Yule flame flickers, the darkness doesn't wait for the fire to die. It just needs a crack. At this point, your body's held together by seal fat, frostbite, and the brittle thread of willpower. Your nose is calcified into a decorative icicle. Your teeth scream when you chew. Your beard crunches when you blink. And yet, somehow, despite everything, the thing that finally breaks you isn't hunger, cold, or supernatural goat drama. It's your boots. They're not even that old. You started the season with what could generously be called sturdy footwear. Stitched reindeer hide lined with wool, patched at the heel with a piece of sled runner and hope. They were laced with leather strips scavenged from a broken belt and sealed with a prayer to whichever Norse deity handles lower extremity comfort. Probably not Odin. He's more of an iron raven guy. But now your boots are alive with spite. They creak ominously when you walk. They squelch when you remove them. Not from moisture, but from absorbed despair. The lining, once soft, has transformed into a crusty blend of foot oil, melted snow, and something fungal. The leather has dried, cracked, and folded into stiff ridges that now seem strategically aligned with your pressure points. You've begun limping. quietly, secretly. At first it was just a little rub on your heel. Now it's a full-blown blister the size of a pigeon egg forming under your arch. You're pretty sure it has a pulse. You try wool, you try moss, you try stuffing your boots with chewed birch bark. The relief is temporary. The pain returns. Worse, colder, sharper. You've developed a gait that resembles a wounded duck navigating hot coals. And the worst part? Everyone notices, but no one helps. Because in Viking winter survival, foot pain is like a squirrel infestation. Tragic, but also slightly hilarious. Someone offers you a second-hand boot from a long-deceased cousin. It smells like pickled horse. You decline. You try going barefoot for a while, inside the longhouse at least. This is a bold move. The floor is not clean. It's a war zone of fish bones, ash, goat fur, and the crumbling remains of your dignity. But the relief is immediate. Your feet sigh. They flex. They begin to believe in miracles again. Then someone drops a hot coal. Right onto your toe, the blister explodes like a Viking curse. You hop around in agony. The goat bleats in what may be laughter. Someone mutters something about Odin's beard and offers a salve made from animal fat and tree resin. You slap it on. It works, sort of. Your foot now smells like smoked squirrel jerky. But the burning stops. Historically, Viking footwear was practical. Turned-up toes for stability, leather soles stitched to wool liners, waterproofing via rendered fat. But when exposed to relentless cold, snow, and human sweat, even the best boots would warp, freeze, and become medieval torture devices. And once the blisters came, infection wasn't far behind. Which you're now learning. Because that blister, it's back. And it brought friends. You remove your sock and discover your heel is merged with the inner wall of the boot like cheese melting into a pan. It peels off with a sound you'll never emotionally recover from. Your foot now resembles an overcooked dumpling. You try drying them by the fire. This shrinks them. You try soaking them in broth. This earns you a stern glare and a ruined dinner. You even try stuffing them with goose down. The goose wants it back. Eventually you're given a rare gift, new boots. Well, newish. They're older than you, made from hide so stiff you could serve soup in them. One toe curls up like it's trying to signal the gods. The other appears to be slightly singed. You put them on anyway. The blisters scream. You scream internally. You go for a walk just to test them. 10 steps in, your pinky toe goes numb. By 20 steps, it's sent a resignation letter to the rest of your foot. By 30, you're sure you've become part of some Norse myth involving cursed footwear and eternal frost damage. You hobble back, defeated. The longhouse floor, for all its discomfort, is now your preferred terrain. You sit down near the fire, you remove the boots. Your feet steam like cursed bread rolls. Someone hands you a bundle of wool. You begin wrapping your feet like delicate injured birds. You stare at your toes and whisper encouragement. You've made it this far. You can't let the boots win, but you'll never forget them. Because in the Viking winter, there's no such thing as comfort, only less pain. And even then, that comes with blisters, burn marks, cold toes, and boots so stiff they could be used as weapons in a skaldic duel. Still, you survive. Your feet, though battered and possibly infected, carry you forward. You've earned the respect of your campmates, or at least their pity. One of them gives you a fish. The goat still won't move from your sleeping spot, but that's fine. Because even with your toes wrapped in moss, seal grease and sorrow, you're still here. You're still walking, kind of. You've become cautious, not wise. That requires sleep and functioning nerve endings, but cautious. You've learned to fear the fire, the latrine, the goat and the longhouse soup. You no longer trust your boots. You sleep with your back to a wall, your socks inside your sleeves, and one eye open for rogue icicles. But for all your paranoia, you weren't prepared for the pine cone. It starts with a simple mission. You're sent to collect firewood. This is not a glamorous job. It's not even a dignified one. It mostly involves trudging through knee-deep snow, swatting away frostbitten branches, and pretending you remember what dry wood looks like. But it's important. Without firewood, the longhouse becomes a frigid tomb, and more importantly, you'll be blamed if the goat starts sleeping inside the stew pot again. So, you go. You strap on your boots, the slightly better pair that only injure 2 of your toes, wrap your cloak, grab a rope basket, and head into the woods. The snow is deep but manageable. You've learned how to move now. Slow, deliberate steps, each one a negotiation with the ice below. The forest is quiet, peaceful. If you squint, you might even call it beautiful, until you slip. Not a full slip, just a sudden jolt as your foot hits a hidden root beneath the snow. You lurch forward. The rope basket swings. Your elbow smashes into a tree trunk. Your nose meets a low-hanging branch. And then, out of nowhere, it happens. The pine cone falls. Now, a pine cone in most parts of the world is a minor inconvenience. At worst, a slightly crunchy surprise underfoot. But this isn't most parts of the world. This is the Viking North. And this pine cone has the size, mass, and malicious intent of a thrown hammer. It strikes you squarely on the scalp. Hard. There's a moment of stillness, then pain. Sharp, stingy pain. The kind of pain that surprises you not because it hurts so badly, but because you've been hit in the head by a pine cone in the year 842, and it's about to ruin your day. You reach up, blood, you stagger back. Another pine cone drops. You flinch. A third falls, bouncing off your shoulder like a smug woodland insult. You look up. The tree is full of them, loaded with frozen jagged cones, stiff, heavy, and hanging at just the right angle to weaponize gravity. You realize slowly that you've wandered into a patch of old-growth pine, and it is not happy to see you. Historically, forests were both lifeline and threat to Viking communities. They offered wood, game, and cover, but they also hid dangers, from wild animals to treacherous ice, to deadfalls and debris. And in deep winter, even something as humble as a pine cone could become a hazard when frozen solid and dropped from 20 feet above your skull. You duck, you sidestep, you move quietly, trying not to disturb the branches, but the snow shifts beneath you, and down comes another cone, catching you just behind the ear. You yelp, you fall, the basket flips, twigs scatter, a branch slaps your face on the way down. You land in a snowbank, humbled. You lie there for a moment, letting the cold seep into your bones. One pine cone rolls to a stop next to your head, like it wants to finish the job. You consider surrendering. Let the forest take you. Let the longhouse remember you as that one who lost to a tree. But then, you sit up. You gather the scattered sticks. You retrieve the basket. You wrap a strip of wool around your bleeding scalp. You glare at the pine cones still dangling above like smug wooden fruit, and you trudge on. You collect your firewood, carefully, selectively, with one eye on the branches at all times. You carry it back through the snow, wincing with every step. When you return, someone points at the lump on your head. You tell them it was a wolf. You tell them the wolf had antlers. You do not say the word pine cone. The longhouse accepts your lie. You sit by the fire, nursing your pride and your head wound. The soup tastes faintly of goat again. You drink it anyway. You have survived yet another trial. Not a noble one, not even a memorable one, but a real one. Because in Viking winter, danger doesn't always wear fangs or come with frostbite. Sometimes it falls silently from a tree, fueled by gravity, boredom, and your own bad luck. And when that happens, you duck faster next time. There is a night in the Viking winter that never seems to end. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. Not with thunder or storm, but with a strange stillness. A frozen calm so dense it presses on your chest like snow you can't see. The fire burns, the stew simmers, the goat breathes loudly in the dark, and yet something feels wrong. You don't sleep. No one really does. This is the longest night. A midwinter phenomenon so steeped in ancient fear that even the bravest skalds sing about it in hushed tones. Because on this night, the wind dies, the moon vanishes, and the fog comes crawling in like a ghost with unfinished business. Historically, Norse people marked midwinter with rituals, firelight and feasting. Not out of joy, but out of dread. In these northern latitudes, the sun can vanish for weeks. Long before clocks or calendars, people relied on the land and their instincts to tell them what season they'd wandered into. And when those instincts whispered something is off, they listened. You hear the whisper too, but not in your head. Outside. The fog arrives after midnight. At first it just looks like smoke. Maybe someone spilled the soup again. But then it creeps in through the seams of the longhouse wall. Tendrils of pale grey air that seem to move against the wind. If there was wind. There is no sound now. No wolves howling. No branches snapping. Even the fire stopped crackling, as if it too is holding its breath. You rise from your mat and glance around. Others are stirring, uneasy. The goat is awake. It is always awake. You peer outside. The world has vanished. There are no trees, no snowbanks, just white. Not the clean kind. This fog is thick, wet, and ancient. It hangs low to the ground, curling along the drifts like smoke from a dying god. You take one cautious step beyond the doorway. Your foot sinks into snow. The fog meets your skin like breath. It's warm. Why is it warm? You step further. You shouldn't. But something calls. Not a voice. Not exactly. More like a pressure behind your ears. A sense that if you just walk a little further, the answers will come. That the cold won't matter. That your name, your pain, your frozen boots are all things you can leave behind. You walk. One step, then another. And then something moves in the fog. You stop. There's no shape, just motion. A slow ripple in the mist, like something brushing through it. The hairs on your arms rise. You squint. You're not sure if it's getting closer, or if you're the one drifting forward. Then it whispers, right next to your ear. You don't understand the words, but your body does. Every muscle tightens, your jaw locks, your legs refuse to move. Not from fear, but because they've turned to wood. You try to turn around. You can't. The whisper again. Software ancient. Hungry. Then, just as suddenly, it's gone. The fog shifts. A breeze returns. The world reappears. You're standing in a snowbank 20 paces from the longhouse, covered in frost, staring at absolutely nothing. You stumble back inside, trembling. No one says a word. Because they know. They've seen it too. No one speaks of the longest night. Not during it. Not after. But everyone knows it's coming. Every winter. One night when the barrier between this world and whatever lies behind it gets thin enough to peel. You eat your soup in silence. You sit near the fire. You avoid the goat's eyes. You try not to listen for the fog's return. Because in the Viking winter, not all dangers have teeth. Some just want you to listen. You've done dangerous things this winter. You've eaten things that shouldn't be food. You've been chased by a goat with no fear and too many muscles. You've stared into the whispering fog and felt your bones hum with ancient panic. But today is something truly reckless. Because today, you're in charge of chopping firewood. At first glance, this seems safe, mundane even, a chore more than a challenge. Just take the axe, find a stump, and swing. But no one tells you that this is the Viking equivalent of playing a slow, splintery game of chicken with physics and frostbite. Because chopping firewood in a Viking winter isn't just work. It's a calculated dance of body mechanics, cold-induced stupidity, and logs that seem to resent you personally. It begins with the axe. It's not sharp. Of course it's not sharp. It's an heirloom passed down through 12 generations, and at least 6 of them used it for ceremonial purposes. The blade is chipped. The handle is wrapped in deer hide that's gone stiff with time and soup grease. You try swinging it and immediately throw out something in your shoulder that was probably important. Still, fire doesn't make itself, and the longhouse has burned through the last of the dry wood. The only fuel left is damp, stubborn logs stacked behind the latrine hut, half frozen and fully angry. You drag one to the chopping block. It's heavy, all knots and bad attitude. You plant it on the stump. You raise the axe. You swing, and the axe bounces, and not glances, bounces. It hits the wood, then springs back toward your own shins with the smug elasticity of a vengeful trout. You stagger back, narrowly avoiding a self-inflicted maiming. You try again. This time the blade bites, but only just. The log doesn't split. It laughs. You can hear it. A low, fibrous chuckle that echoes through the forest and into your bones. You press on, swing after swing, blow after blow. You battle the wood like it insulted your lineage. Your arms ache. Your fingers go numb. You start to hallucinate that the log is fighting back. And in a way, it is. Because here's what no one tells you. Frozen wood is practically stone. Historically, Vikings burned whatever fuel they could find. Wood, peat, dung, driftwood. But in the deep cold, everything freezes. And when that happens, chopping wood becomes less about cleaving and more about waging war on a small, icy fortress. Even seasoned warriors risked injury with every swing. And you? You're not seasoned. Your gloves are soaked. Your breath fogs the air. You've stripped down to your inner layers despite the cold because sweat is pouring off you, like you're boiling from the inside out. You've started naming the logs. The one you just hit is Thorbjorn. He's winning. Eventually, through some combination of brute force and luck, you split one. The log breaks with a sound like a tree giving birth. You cheer. You immediately slip on the half you just chopped and land flat on your back, knocking the wind out of your lungs and the last shred of dignity out of your soul. You lie there for a moment, staring up at the grey sky, watching a single snowflake land directly in your open mouth. You're done. Or so you think. Because now it's time to carry the wood back. This sounds easy. It is not. The firewood is heavy, awkward, moist. It slides out of your arms with the oily grace of a drunk eel. The basket digs into your shoulders. Your balance wobbles. The snow drifts are deeper than before. And your boots, those cursed blister-forging monstrosities, are not cooperating. You trip 3 times. On the 4th fall, a piece of firewood lands directly on your pinky toe. You feel it crack. You do not scream. You just lie down, face first in the snow, and wait for either death or the goat to find you and gloat. Eventually you return to the longhouse, covered in bruises, soaked in sweat, dragging 8 measly logs that cost you an afternoon, a few brain cells, and possibly a metatarsal. You drop them beside the hearth. No one applauds. Of course they don't. They just nod as if to say, you've now joined the ranks of the foolish and the frostbitten. Welcome. You sit by the fire. You stare at the wood as it burns. It crackles like it's mocking you, and yet the warmth it gives off feels worth it. Almost. Because in the Viking winter, survival doesn't come from heroism. It comes from winning tiny, stupid battles against things like soup, socks, and stubborn logs. You don't need glory. You just need heat, even if it costs you your toes. You don't believe it at first, and the cold is still there. The snow still crunches like old bones underfoot. Your beard still crackles when you move too fast, and your left sock still smells like seal fat and spiritual surrender. But something has shifted. The wind changes, and it doesn't hurt. That's the first sign. Not warmth, exactly. That won't come for weeks. But the absence of pain when the wind hits your skin. Your face no longer goes numb within minutes. Your fingers can flex without snapping like dried twigs. You can breathe deep without your nostrils sealing shut mid-inhale. Spring. It's coming. Not in birdsong or blossoms. Not yet. But in slow, tentative moments. A drip of water from the longhouse roof, a patch of dirt visible beneath the firewood pile, a sudden realization that the latrine trench is slightly less horrifying than it was a week ago. You wake one morning to find the goat lying outside the longhouse, voluntarily, as if even it has decided the worst is over. You feel suspicious. Winter doesn't just leave, it retreats like a Viking raider, grudgingly, noisily, and ready to return the moment your back is turned. But still, the snow begins to rot. The ice on the stream cracks like it's laughing at you. The longhouse begins to smell less like fermented despair, and more like wet fur and relief. You look around and realise you're still here, and you're not alone. The others are emerging from their beds like mole people blinking into daylight. There are matted beards, haunted eyes, and at least one person who appears to have fused with their cloak. but they're alive. Even the goat looks different. It's shedding its winter coat in clumps, revealing beneath it more goat. Someone stirs the soup with slightly more optimism. Someone else opens the longhouse flap and leaves it open for several seconds before slamming it shut again and cursing the breeze. Progress! You find yourself wandering outside, not for chores, not for latrine emergencies, but just to walk. The snow is still thick, but it's softening. Patches of lichen peek through. The trees are shedding their icicles like bad memories. And the silence? It's changing. Not gone, but lighter. You hear birds. Not many, just one. Probably lost. But it's singing anyway. You cry a little and pretend it's allergies. Spring in the Viking world isn't a Disney montage. It's not flowers and hugs and goat parades. It's slow, muddy, smelly. Everything smells like mould and thawing goat droppings. The longhouse leaks. The floor turns to mush. The stored fish starts fermenting in ways that would make Loki weep. But the sky is lighter. The sun lingers. And suddenly people start talking again. Not about survival, not about soup rations or frostbitten toes, but about plans, boats, crops, raids, arguments about which gods deserve thanks, the ones who made you strong enough to survive, or the ones who didn't kill you out of boredom. You don't care, you just want to feel your feet again. You begin peeling off your layers, slowly, suspiciously. Your tunic no longer crackles with ice. Your boots no longer need to be reheated near the fire before they'll bend. You discover a second sock you forgot you were wearing, and it has fused to your leg. You leave it. You even bathe. Once. The stream is still glacial, but you do it. You dunk yourself, howl like a dying walrus, and crawl back to shore. But for the first time in months you feel clean. Kind of. You still smell like soup. That part may never leave. Then comes the first night you don't need a fire. You sit outside, the stars look different. Not warmer, just less cruel. The fog doesn't whisper anymore, it just drifts. You lean back on a damp rock, stare at the sky, and realise something profound. You made it. You, a walking ball of blisters, goat hair, stew scars, and spiritual frostbite. You have somehow, against all logic and nutrition, survived an entire Viking winter in a drafty wooden box filled with smoke, animal drama, and fermented hallucinations. You didn't freeze. You weren't eaten. You didn't go full soup mad. And that, in this place, in this time, is a feat worthy of saga. Of course, the next disaster is already brewing. The goat is staring at the food stores again. The elders are sharpening things. The birds are returning. And you've remembered you're allergic to feathers. But that's later. For now, you breathe. You stretch your limbs. You sip something warm that doesn't taste like foot broth. And for the first time in months you realise that you are not currently dying. And in the Viking North, that's what passes for a victory. So here you are. You've survived the smoke, the soup, the whispers in the fog, the goat. You've slipped, stumbled, blistered, hallucinated, and gone mildly feral inside a wooden longhouse that reeked of ash, ambition, and at least 3 kinds of stew. You've dodged wolves. You've made questionable deals with pine cones. You've worn socks that may have contained ecosystems. And through it all, you kept going. Because in the Viking North, survival isn't clean. It isn't noble. It isn't carved into runestones or shouted from mountaintops. It's quiet, grimy, sometimes wet, sometimes itchy. And mostly it's about getting through one more day without freezing, starving, exploding your toe with an axe, or offending the goat again. Now, as spring stretches its thawing fingers across the land, and the longhouse creaks a little less, and the snow finally stops trying to smother you in your sleep, you lie back, you breathe, and you remember the firewood you chopped, the blot ceremony that definitely summoned something, the night you swore your beard whispered a riddle to you in your sleep, the goat uprising, and the soup, always the soup. You may never be clean again. You may never look at a turnip without flinching. You may carry the faint scent of dried fish and regret for the rest of your life. But you're here. You made it. And now, finally, as the stars stretch wider across a kinder sky, and the world begins to melt around you in slow drips and soft winds. Your body relaxes. Your breath slows. The cold has loosened its grip, and the long, wild, ridiculous winter fades into memory. A half dream, half nightmare, strangely funny and deeply real. You're still here, somehow, and that's enough. Good night, survivor, sleep well, and maybe keep one eye on the goat, just in case.